Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Wednesday, November 26th. Members of Parliament from multiple parties blasted Stellantis on Tuesday for failing to appear at a committee hearing examining the federal government's multi-million-dollar funding agreements with the global automaker. A company executive was set to testify by video conference before the House of Commons Government Operations and Estimates Committee on Tuesday morning, but the executive never appeared, leaving MPs waiting nearly the entire 2-hour public meeting. Committee Chair Kelly McCauley said Stellantis was having technical problems, but he and other members of the panel cast some doubt on that explanation.
We'll start with Mr. Seaback for 6 minutes, please.
Great. So, in your statement, you just said that you're trying to redact, commercially sensitive information, which I understand.
Point of order, Chair?
What I do find.
I'm sorry, this is point of order. I'll stop the clock.
Was there any other opening remarks from any?
They haven't signed on yet. We're waiting for them to sign on.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
IT issues.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question. Is Stellantis coming? Because, look, we're at a dead end.
We are still having IT issues with them. I'm not going to judge, but I'm not sensing a lot of desire for them to address the IT issues. But we've contacted them. We're waiting to hear back from them, and we'll keep at it.
Moi, Monsieur le Président,
Look, they can come see us. But how is it that it takes an agreement with third parties to disclose a contract signed with public dollars and not all the numbers are provided? We understand the issue of commercial sensitive information. We just need Stellantis' green light, and then we can end the meeting, and then we schedule something that's unredacted, and then we can really get down to business. Because now we're taking 2 hours, and we all agree that it is our parliamentary privilege to see contracts completely. Now, in the negotiations, maybe there will be clauses that will not be there, because we want to honor those clauses. But at the end of the day, it's taxpayer dollars, so we don't have a choice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the members who are in person. I am incredibly annoyed that Stellantis has not been able to join us. I understand they're working through the IT issues, but this is incredibly frustrating. And I just want to reiterate for the record, is at this point unacceptable.
Prime Minister Mark Carney found himself under fire in the House of Commons on Tuesday over 2 hot-button issues. First, Carney addressed his own controversial remark about U.S. trade talks. When asked about progress, he replied, "Who cares?" calling it a poor choice of words.
Since the Prime Minister was elected promising, quote, to negotiate a win with the U.S., American tariffs on autos, aluminum and steel have doubled, and on Canadian lumber, they've tripled. Not a single American tariff has been reduced since he promised he would reduce them. And now he says, who cares? Yep. Mr. Speaker, I care about the 3,000 auto workers that I met on the picket line in Brampton who are out of a job. I care about the 8 mills that have closed because the Prime Minister failed to deliver a deal. The workers on those lines, they care. Canadians care. Why doesn't the Prime Minister care?
Hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, since I became Prime Minister, Canada has secured the lowest tariffs of any country in the world. On 85% of our goods, the tariffs are zero. Yes, Mr. Speaker, there are sectors, the auto sector, the steel sector, the lumber sector, the aluminum sector, that are under pressure. We care. We're acting in those sectors. There will be announcements this week to further support.
After, it was, who cares? Before the election, he said the tariffs were an existential crisis. Now he says they're not a burning issue. Before the election, he promised to negotiate a win. After, he backed down to American tariffs, and those tariffs have now doubled on Canadian aluminum, autos, and steel, and tripled on Canadian lumber. Before the election, he promised the fastest growing economy in the G7. After, he delivered the fastest shrinking economy. Why is the Prime Minister before the election so much different than the one after?
Yeah. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, on the night of the election, when I had the great honor from my constituents of being elected as a deputy of this House, unlike some others in the chamber today, I made a promise to Canadians. When I make a mistake, I'll admit it. That was a poor choice of words about a serious issue. And the serious issue is what progress are we making structurally? Best deal in the world, strongest budget in the world, and the most new trade deals in the world.
The Prime Minister then shifted to energy policy, saying British Columbia must agree on any pipeline from Alberta to the Pacific coast, as Ottawa moves closer to unveiling a new energy pact with Alberta. Pierre Poilievre pressed him on when construction would begin.
Speaking of Canadian interest, this Prime Minister opposed the pipeline from Alberta to the Pacific, just like his Liberal predecessor blocked that same pipeline. On Thursday, he'll make one of his grand announcements, waving around a meaningless so-called memorandum of understanding. If it's anything other than a public relations ploy, why won't he say on what date will construction begin on a pipeline from Alberta to the Pacific?
Hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, sometimes the question reveals everything. The memorandum of understanding that we're negotiating with Alberta creates necessary conditions, but not sufficient conditions, because we believe in cooperative federalism. We believe the government of British Columbia has to agree. We believe that First Nations right holders in this country have to agree and support. All stakeholders have to back. That's one Canada.
U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, told a senior Kremlin official last month that achieving peace in Ukraine would require Russia gaining control of Donetsk and potentially a separate territorial exchange. That's according to a recording of their conversation obtained by Bloomberg. In the October 14th phone call with the top foreign policy aide to the Russian president, Witkoff said he believed the land concessions were necessary. U.S. President Donald Trump has defended Special Envoy Steve Witkoff as doing the standard thing.
Well, I haven't heard it, no, but that's a standard thing, because he's got to sell this to Ukraine. He's got to sell Ukraine to Russia. That's what a deal maker does. You got to say, look, they want this. You've got to convince them with this. That's a very standard form of negotiation. I haven't heard it, but I heard it was standard negotiation. And I would imagine he's saying the same thing to Ukraine, because each party has to give and take.
So you're not worried that he's too pro-Russian?
No, I think, look, this war could go on for years, and Russia's got a lot more people, got a lot more soldiers, So I think if Ukraine can make a deal, it's a good thing. I think it's great for both. Frankly, I think it's great for both. But Ukraine's got it's much smaller. It's a much smaller group of people. They've lost a lot of people. Russia's lost a lot of people, but Russia has a much bigger pool of people.
President Trump also added that he's sending envoy Witkoff to meet with the Russian president next week.
We started with Russia. We're having some talks with Russia. Ukraine is doing well. I think they're pretty happy about it. They'd like to see it end. And we won't know for a little while, but we're making progress.
You said, what are the big sticking?
We settled 8 wars, and I thought this would be one of the easier ones because of my relationship with President Putin. But this is probably one of the more difficult ones. There's a lot of hatred.
What's the next step?
They're going to keep talking. They're talking to Russia now. Steve Witkoff is going over, maybe with Jared. I'm not sure about Jared going, but he's involved in the process. Smart guy, and they're going to be meeting with President Putin, I believe, next week in Moscow.
Next week in Moscow?
I think so, yes. I don't have a deadline. What the deadline for me is when it's over. And I think everybody's tired of fighting at this moment.
Now to devastating news from Hong Kong, where a massive fire tore through multiple high-rise apartment buildings in a housing complex, leaving 36 people dead and many others trapped inside. According to Hong Kong Fire Services, 9 people were pronounced dead at the scene, while others who were hospitalized later succumbed to their injuries. Authorities report that at least 279 people are still missing. Around 700 residents have been evacuated to temporary shelters as emergency crews battle the blaze. The fire first reported in the mid-afternoon and continued to rage late into the night. Coming up after the break, Canada and India are close to finalizing a uranium export agreement in a deal valued at about $2.8 billion US. We'll have this story and more news after the break. Canada and India are close to finalizing a uranium export agreement in a deal valued at about $2.8 billion US. The Globe and Mail reported on Monday, citing people familiar with the matter. The deal for Canada to ship uranium to India would run for 10 years if finalized. Canada and India are working to rebuild trade ties and explore new areas of cooperation after a 2-year chill. A Canadian trade minister said on Thursday that Ottawa is keen to restart trade negotiations under a new process. And tensions around food affordability are already running high, with soaring grocery prices, fewer low-cost options, and the added pressure of holiday spending. Now, a new lawsuit is stirring even more frustration. It alleges that a Campbell's executive mocked the company's own canned soup and the people who rely on it, reportedly calling it food for poor people. The claim comes from a former security specialist at Campbell's who says that he was fired after reporting that what he described as inappropriate conduct by Senior Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer Martin Bally. NDP MP Gord Johns is calling on the federal government to implement a national strategy on brain injuries. Johns says that the new bill he is bringing forward will support those who have brain injuries at all stages of recovery.
Bill C-206 requires the Minister of Health to develop a strategy to support and improve brain injury awareness, prevention, and treatment, as well as improving the rehabilitation and recovery of people living with a brain injury. The strategy would also require consultation with provincial and territorial governments responsible for health, Indigenous people and Indigenous groups, and relevant stakeholders. The strategy requires a number of things, including the implementation of preventative measures, identifying the training, education, and guidance needs of healthcare professionals, and identify the challenges resulting from brain injury, such as mental health problems, addiction, housing and homelessness issues, and criminality.
As the United States moves closer to officially designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, calls are growing in Canada for the government to take similar action. Earlier, we spoke with the Toronto Sun's Brian Passafoom to get his insight on what could happen next and how such a move might impact policy and security decisions here at home. Brian, thank you so much for the time today.
Happy to help.
Now, can you walk us through where the Muslim Brotherhood operates around the world and why the U.S. is designating them as a terrorist group?
Well, they started, they're almost a century-old organization. They started in Egypt, 1928. It's sort of a pan-national Islamic organization. They've been banned off and on in Egypt. Most recently, the overthrow of Mohamed Morsi in 2013. He was the president of Egypt who was affiliated with the Brotherhood. He was deposed, and the organization was subsequently banned again in Egypt. And it's been done in other countries in the world. Austria has banned it. United Arab Emirates has banned it. Jordan has banned it, and very, very soon the United States will ban them as well.
And what groups in Canada are leading the calls for Canada to follow the U.S.'s lead on this?
A lot of Jewish groups, a lot of groups that are concerned with international terrorism. Imam Tawhidi, who is the head of the Global Imams Council, is one of the more prominent voices in banning the Brotherhood. He described the Brotherhood as there being no greater threat to national security in Canada today than the Muslim Brotherhood. I said there's no threat greater in reach, no threat greater in its ideological influence, or its ability to infiltrate, manipulate, and mobilize. So yeah, there's been a lot of talk, for the past few decades, particularly here in Canada, about the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood. So yeah, a lot of groups are hoping that Canada will follow through with the United States in banning them. Canada has taken taken prompts from the U.S. before when it came to banning organizations. For example, Canada's banning of Samidoun, which is a Canadian-based Islamic terror organization, was largely prompted by the United States declaring them banned as well as Canada's pause but subsequent restart of their funding towards UNRWA, the United Nations organization tasked with operating hospitals and education in Gaza and the West Bank.
Now, if Canada were to designate the group as a terrorist organization, what would happen next?
Well, that's the question, because Canada has had some pretty recent history of being a little slow to the punch when it comes to actually following through with these bans. Like I mentioned before, Samidoun, they had declared them a prescribed terror organization, but it took quite a while, and it took pressure from reporters such as myself and other media organizations to convince the federal government to withdraw their federal not-for-profit status. It just seemed ridiculous that a group declared a terror organization by Canada is still able to operate as a not-for-profit. So really, these declarations of banned groups really mean nothing if the government has no desire to follow through and actually make sure that these bans mean something.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for the time. We appreciate it.
Always happy to. Thank you.
At a news conference on Parliament Hill yesterday, Liberal MP Salma Zahid, NDP MP Heather McPherson, and representatives of several advocacy groups called on the federal government to act with urgency in processing student visas for Palestinians.
My student's name is Wasim. He is from Gaza City. He is a top scholar, accepted based on merit, and awarded an international scholarship. For over 12 months, he's logged into the IRCC website, waiting for a change to his visa status. For 12 months, there have been no changes. We have asked directly for updates, and we're repeatedly told there have been no changes to the status of your application. For others in Gaza, this wait has been 24 months, others longer still. This delay is not arbitrary, it's not bureaucratic, it's not biometrics, it's intentional. And for what Dr. Gabor Mate has referred to as the most urgent moral matter of our time, Canada and the IRCC are failing.
You know, the University of Alberta is one of Canada's great research universities. It is in my riding of Edmonton-Strathcona, and more than 40 students from Gaza have been admitted to the University of Alberta to pursue graduate studies, to have their academic futures put on hold because Minister Diab's refusal to act. These brilliant students should be in Edmonton, but they are still in Gaza because the government and this minister have been ignoring our pleas for months to take action. And it is not just the University of Alberta. Canadian universities across the country are losing exceptional academic students, academic talent, because the government refuses to bring these students here.
The lawmakers and advocates emphasized the importance of ensuring timely access to education, highlighting the barriers many Palestinian students face in navigating visa applications. They called on Ottawa to implement clearer procedures and faster processing times, stressing the delays could jeopardize students' academic opportunities and future prospects. And this morning in a press briefing, the spokesperson for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed that another hostage's body has been returned to Israel.
On Tuesday evening, our IDF forces inside of the Gaza Strip received the remains of a hostage from the Red Cross. Those remains were supposedly found and located by the terror group Palestinian Islamic Jihad nearly 2 days ago, constituting as a blatant violation as the terror group decided not to return those remains immediately. Now, following the completion of the identification process by the Forensic Institute and informing the family this morning, the remains of this deceased hostage who finally returned home is Dror Or of blessed memory. Dror's story is a dark reminder of the horrors our people endured on October 7th and afterwards as hostages. It's also a reminder of the sickening, grotesque, and barbaric actions Hamas and its Palestinian terror alliance forces took on October 7th to brutalize our people, murder them for being Jewish, and massacre them in ways we will never forget. Dror Or was 48 years old. He was a father of 3 and a husband to Yonat of blessed memory from Kibbutz Be'eri. Dror worked for many years at the Be'eri dairy and specialized in cheese making there. He even spent time in Italy to understand the craft of it. He was also a chef and a yoga teacher. On the morning of October 7th, the Orr family took shelter in the safe room of their home, when terrorists soon after set the entire house on fire, causing Dror and Yonat and their children to evacuate through the window. Both Dror and Yonat split up and tried to escape, but were murdered by terrorists. Their children, their 2 children, Noam and Alma, were kidnapped alive into Gaza. They were held there for 50 days until they were released in November of 2023.
With the return of the remains, there are now 2 remaining deceased hostages being held in Gaza.
We will tell Dror's story even when media outlets won't. We will tell the stories of our other 2 hostages, Ran Gvili, Sutiask Rintalak, when the media won't. We will continue to remind the media and the world that we still have 2 more hostages in captivity, 2 more hostages, a violation under the ceasefire, as Hamas and other terror factions inside of Gaza claim they can't find them. Palestinian terrorists took our people on October 7th, and you do not just lose people, you take captive.
Coming up after the break, Canada's public broadcaster, the CBC, has faced plenty of criticism over the last 2 years, and our contributor David Clement will join us with the full story. We'll have this news and more of today's top national and international headlines right after the break. Forum Daily News will be back shortly. Canada's public broadcaster, the CBC, has faced plenty of criticism over the last few years, from executive bonuses during layoffs to refusing to release subscriber data for their platform CBC Gem. But now a former employee is speaking out. Our contributor David Clement has more.
Tonight, we dive into a scathing critique of the CBC from one of its own veterans. David Cayley, a longtime CBC radio producer and host, has released a new book slamming the public broadcaster for what he calls one-sided thoughtlessness and cheerleading. In an exclusive interview with the National Post, he argues that the CBC has lost its way, becoming an echo chamber rather than a platform for national dialogue. Cayley, who spent over 4 decades at CBC Radio from 1971 to 2012, produced documentaries and hosted the acclaimed program Ideas. His book, The CBC, How Canada's Public Broadcaster Lost Its Voice and How to Get It Back, published by Sutherland House, comes at a pivotal time. Just this year, the federal budget boosted CBC funding by $150 million to modernize its mandate and combat misinformation. But Cayley sees this as politically motivated, quipping that while conservatives want to defund the CBC, liberals are rushing to refund it. At the heart of Cayley's criticism is the idea that the CBC has exhausted its old model. He says, quote, everything ends in the end, adding, and I believe that its properties, the idea that it would belong to the audience, that it would stake its legitimacy on the audience, has brought it to a place where it only has one preferred audience and it can't address the rest of the country and can't get outside or above or beyond the assumptions it shares with that audience. So it's kind of become a boutique. In other words, the CBC is stuck in a monologue, failing to engage with diverse perspectives and instead pushing ideological finished views. Cayley points to several case studies to illustrate his point. During the COVID-19 pandemic, he argues the CBC delivered thoughtless cheerleading instead of careful deliberation. Governments flip-flopped on key messages like whether vaccines spread through the body or the virus's origins, yet labeled scientific disagreements as misinformation. He said, quote, so there was a constant change in what the story was, right? Asking, well, that wasn't misinformation, was it? He also slams the CBC's coverage of the 2022 Freedom Convoy protests against mandates. While acknowledging the protesters were noisy and rude in certain ways, he insists they arrived in Ottawa with significant national support and a valid proposition that authorities had gone too far. Yet, the CBC dismissed them outright. Another flashpoint is the narrative around residential schools. Cayley criticizes moves like NDP Leah Gazan's bill to outlaw denialism and incidents where alternative views are attacked, such as in Quesnel, BC, where a mayor faced backlash over a book offering a different perspective. He said, quote, "I don't think you can have history unless you are allowed to have competing views of history and not a compulsory narrative." He asserts, so if our history is composed entirely of compulsory narratives, and the CBC is full of these compulsory narratives, these orthodoxies that cannot be questioned, then we have effectively no history, and that is too dangerous. He dedicates his book to Harold Innis, the influential Canadian thinker who inspired Marshall McLuhan. Innis argued for a CBC from a withdrawn place, free from political pressures, where real thinking can occur, something Cayley says the CBC desperately needs. But what is his solution? Well, it's to hire intellectually engaged staff who don't turtle when faced with tough questions and create space for antagonistic viewpoints to break the monoculture. This critique resonates amid global media scandals like the BBC's recent bias issues that toppled executives. As Canada grapples with its public broadcaster's role, Cayley's book, described by him as just the tip of the iceberg, calls for a radical rethink. Will the CBC listen? Well, only time will tell.
Energy and Natural Resources Minister Tim Hodgson is set to brief BC Liberal MPs today on the government's expected energy deal with the province of Alberta. The move comes after BC Liberal MPs last week said any deal involving a pipeline to the West Coast would need consent from First Nations and the BC government. Concerns have been on the rise from BC this week about how the deal is shaping up, with Premier David Eby saying it was unacceptable that Ottawa and Alberta were negotiating a potential pipeline without involving his government. With the Memorandum of Understanding potentially being signed on Thursday between Ottawa and the Alberta government on a new pipeline running through northern BC, will that silence more talk about Alberta separation? Our Western Canada Bureau Chief Hal Roberts posed that question to Mount Royal University political science professor Dwayne Bratt.
Dwayne, the contentious issue has been that pipeline. Premier Daniel Smith says Alberta really needs to get its bitumen to the Asia markets through northern British Columbia, but a lot has to happen in order for that to take place. But if it does materialize, will that maybe quiet the voices of those here in Alberta who want to separate?
Oh, I think so. I think Thursday will be a big win for Daniel Smith and those that are advocating for separatism. There's a core group, and it doesn't matter what you do, they want to separate. But the ability to sway another 10, 20, 30%, they needed the pipeline to fail. They needed a crisis, and they needed a lot of anger, and it looks like that's dissipating. This explains why Jeff Rath, one of the independence leaders, is so mad at the MOU and dismissing it by saying, well, it's not an operational pipeline. That's true. It's not an operational pipeline, but you can't get to that unless you take this step.
Now, many would argue that the federal government has not really supported our energy sector over the past decade, but that's not the only reason the separatist movement has grown in our province, Dwayne. I mean, many are still angry at the billions upon billions of dollars in transfer payments, which leave Alberta and which rarely makes its way back here. Could that maybe be adding fuel to the fire?
Well, that has always been made the case, but Alberta doesn't pay transfer payments. Albertans pay transfer payments. And the reason that we pay more per capita is because Alberta has been the richest province for decades. So it'd be like saying, well, millionaires pay more taxes than other people. Yes, because they're richer and wealthier. And that's the way I view transfer payments. The Confederation is more than just dollars in and dollars out.
Now, it appears as though Prime Minister Mark Carney is making much better inroads with the Alberta government than his predecessor to Justin Trudeau. Will that really help create more stability for Carney's minority government moving forward?
I don't think it affects the minority government because another person who's going to be unhappy with this is Pierre Poilievre. So you need to separate federal politics from federal provincial relations. Usually a brand new prime minister has a bit of a honeymoon with the premiers. So when people said, well, Justin Trudeau did not get along with the premiers, he didn't, except he did in 2015 and 2016. Stephen Harper had trouble with premiers in 2015, but he had good relations in 2006. So we're still in the honeymoon period with Mark Carney. And I think it's a huge win for Danielle Smith, this MOU, but it's also a win for Mark Carney. And I can tell you, I was at a Premier's Dinner event last night in Edmonton on tourism. So not about oil and gas, totally different sector. Danielle Smith couldn't say more than nice things about Mark Carney. And in fact, she has been doing that for months on end. That tells you how well she thinks progress is going on this.
Okay, so if there's that strong relationship between the federal and provincial government right now, where will that leave Pierre Poilievre and the Tories?
In a very difficult spot. There's been various times he's been offside of Smith because they have very different agendas. He can't work with Carney the way Danielle Smith can. He was much happier when they were opponents. And by the way, if Pierre Poilievre had become prime minister, there would have been eventual tensions between Poilievre and Smith, just as there were tensions between Harper and Prentice and Harper and Notley. It's just, that's the way politics works.
What makes you say that, though? I mean, they're both conservatives. Couldn't they find...
It doesn't matter that they're conservatives. It's like saying John Horgan, the BC Premier, would get along well with Rachel Notley because they were both NDPers. Or Christy Clark, in the sort of non-socialist government of BC, did not get along with Alison Redford. It depends on your jurisdiction much more than your party affiliation.
MRU, political science professor Dwayne Brett, thanks so much for your time today.
You're welcome, Hal.
A Calgary man charged with 5 counts of attempted murder after a chaotic incident in a Lethbridge parking lot has had his case held over. The lawyer for 47-year-old Christopher David Haig says a psychological assessment is needed for his client. Haig was charged after a vehicle struck 3 pedestrians in a Lethbridge Arena parking lot on October 10th. Coming up after the break, swimmer Penny Alexiak, Canada's most decorated female Olympian, has accepted a 2-year competition ban after recording 3 whereabouts failures. We'll be right back after these messages. Flu cases are on the rise across Canada, and health experts are warning this could be the start of a tough season. They're keeping a close eye on an evolving H3N2 strain spreading globally, one that might not be a perfect match for this year's flu vaccine. New federal data released shows about 2% of tests across the country came back positive for influenza last week. That's still below the 5% threshold for declaring a national flu epidemic, but it's a clear jump from just a few weeks ago. Experts say that's happening overseas could offer a warning for Canada. The Southern Hemisphere has seen record flu numbers this year, and several parts of Asia and the UK have already experienced early intense flu season. I sat down with Dr. Abhishek Raut, medical director at Appletree Medical Group, who explained why experts are warning that this could be the worst kind of flu season and what's driving their concerns this year.
Well, first, flu season severity will depend on a lot of different factors. It can be the type of influenza that's circulating, how well the vaccine matches the strains, and a level of immunity in the population as well. This year, we're more concerned because we're seeing early signs from the Southern Hemisphere. So Canada will often look to countries like Australia to see what the experience with their flu season was. And their season was longer and more intense than usual. We are also seeing multiple respiratory viruses circulating at once. We're dealing with COVID-19, RSV vaccine. So this is what we call the triple threat when we bring in influenza as well. The concern is also a low vaccine uptake. Flu vaccination rates in Canada has been declining in recent years, especially amongst younger adults.
Dr. Rowe breaks down the H3N2 strain, what it is, and why it's proving to be such a challenge this season.
So when we classify influenza, we classify them into A, B, C, and D. Influenza A is the one that's most associated with pandemics and severe seasonal outbreaks. Within A, we will further classify according to two surface proteins, hemagglutinin H and neuraminidase N. So that's where you get your H and the N. So H3N2 virus has H3 type of that hemagglutinin and N2 type of the neuraminidase. So why is it problematic? It's problematic because the H3N2 one in particular can mutate more quickly than the other strains. So it makes it harder for our immune systems to recognize it, and then harder for vaccines to stay well matched.
He also addresses concerns that this year's flu season may not be the perfect match for the vaccine and what that means for people's level of protection.
So I think that's a very important and nuanced question, because people will hear the flu vaccine may not be a perfect match, and it sounds discouraging. It sounds like, why do I need to get vaccinated at all? But let's go through what a perfect match or a not a perfect match means. So the WHO and the national health agencies will study flu strains circulating globally and will try to predict which ones are more likely to dominate in the upcoming season. Then the vaccine is formulated months in advance. But like we talked about, the H3N2 can mutate quickly as well. So not a perfect match doesn't mean the vaccine is useless. In fact, it means that the antibodies generated by the shot may not recognize the virus as efficiently. So what does that mean in general? In general, what does that say is that if we have something that's a poor match, the vaccine might reduce your risk of getting sick by maybe 30 to 40%, compared to 50 to 60% in a good match year.
Dr. Rout outlines which groups are most at risk this season and how they can best protect themselves.
And that's a crucial question, because we do need to look at risk groups in general, but more specifically with H3N2. So infants and young children, their immune systems are still developing, and it makes them less able to fight off influenza. So they're certainly more prone to complications like pneumonia, dehydration, ear infections as well. Similarly, seniors, so ages 65 and above, have weaker immune systems, and they're more likely to develop serious complications as well. Historically, H3N2 seasons are hardest on seniors with the higher hospitalization and death rates. Having said that, there are people with chronic medical conditions, asthma, COPD, diabetes, heart disease, and weakened immune systems that are certainly at higher risk in general for flu and H3N2. And pregnant individuals as well, because pregnancy changes the immune system and it makes flu infections more dangerous as well. Finally, I would say that healthcare workers are at especially high risk because of the contact and because of the work that they do as well. So certainly a lot of high-risk groups that we do need to watch out for.
He also explains how lingering effects of COVID-19, from weakened immunity to lower vaccine uptake, are contributing to concerns about this year's flu season.
I think that's a very insightful question, because with the legacy of COVID-19, it still shapes a lot of the respiratory illnesses we have. The lingering effects on immunity is still there. Post-COVID, immune changes are still present, and there is long-term immune dysregulation in many people. We do see reduced exposure during the pandemic. So for 2 years, there was masking, distancing, and lockdowns, which means we had less exposure to flu viruses in general, which sounds very positive, but it also means our immune system hadn't been reminded of how to fight influenza. So that immune gap also leads a lot of people susceptible. Long COVID and chronic illnesses have certainly played a big role. But I think a big role now that we're dealing with is pandemic fatigue. So after many years of vaccination campaigns, many people just feel that vaccine fatigue and are just less motivated to get shots in general, including their flu shot. So certainly we have seen still a lot of spillover from COVID-19 causing issues for our health and preventative health today.
A legendary Canadian curler and one of the most decorated in her sport has died. The family of Colleen Jones says she passed away on Monday, and her son Luke said that she was battling cancer. The native of Halifax won 6 Scotties Tournaments of Hearts national titles. She shared the record for most national titles with her namesake Jennifer Jones and Jill Officer. Jones also won a couple of world championships along with 1 senior championship. She played in a record 21 national championships in total. Swimmer Penny Alexiak, Canada's most decorated female Olympian, has accepted a 2-year competition ban after recording 3 whereabouts failures. The suspension is retroactive to July 15th of this year and will keep Alexiak out of the competition until July 14th, 2027. According to the Aquatics Integrity Unit, all of the 25-year-old Toronto athletes' competitive results from June 16th and onward will be disqualified, including the forfeit of medals, points, and prize money. I sat down with Ryan Eakin, a freelance sports reporter, to break down what this means for Alexiak's career.
Now, have we seen other Olympic athletes get banned for something like this before?
Yeah, we have definitely seen it in the past. You go back to 2020, and there was an American a track and field athlete that was suspended for not showing up to drug testing. And the theme with the Olympic protocol especially, but just overall in track and field, swimming, whatever it might be, they get lots of opportunities before they get suspended for something like this. They get not only written letters, but they are told, we can come to you. You don't have to come to us for testing like this. And near the end, once they realize that you probably won't be showing up, you get phone calls, you get text messages, you get emails. They go above and beyond to make sure that you get tested and have the opportunity to be tested before being suspended. And in the case of this one American track and field athlete, the reason why he was not showing up to his testing is because he was doping. And he admitted that after the fact. This one's a bit more different. There's actually no reason to believe that Penny was doping. In fact, there's no proof whatsoever. There's some speculation that has something to do with her not wanting to be an athlete any longer. She was just becoming disinterested. And there's other speculation of other things. So it's a lot different. There's actually no reason to believe that she was using performance-enhancing drugs, which I think should dial back the conversation when it comes to taking away medals from the past Olympics or whatever, because at the end of the day, she still is Canada's most decorated Olympian.
Now, and a lot of critics are saying that Alexiak actually got a super harsh penalty, but that this is just something that you have to follow through with. But does that mean that Alexiak's future in sports could potentially be coming to an end? I mean, with the Olympics coming up in 2028 and having to take 2 years off, what could that mean for her?
It seems unlikely that she'll definitely get back to her past dominance. She will be in her late 20s by that point, and for an Olympic athlete, a swimming athlete especially, you're past your peak at that point, for as crazy as that sounds.
Well, Ryan, thank you so much for the time. We appreciate it.
The Olympic flame began its journey today toward the Milan Cortina Winter Games, though the launch was missing some of its usual flair. Severe weather sweeping across western Greece forced organizers to hold their traditional torch lighting indoors, moving the ceremony from Olympia's ancient stadium and temples into a nearby museum.
Paris 2024 Olympic Games, Petros Gaidatsis.
A Greek rower lit the torch to officially start the relay, which will travel to Italy and be carried by about 10,000 runners across the host country ahead of the February 6th to 22nd Games. I'm Teresa Skubic, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Good night, Canada.